Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, 2017 MSP Global Pricing Survey. I'm Sara Duffy, the Marketing Manager here at Intronis, and I'm happy to be moderating today's session. Today, I am joined by Miguel Lopez, SVP of Managed Service Providers at Kaseya. During today's webinar, Miguel will be highlighting from the Pricing Survey report, such as leading ways high-growth MSPs differ from lower-growth MSPs, which services are heating up in 2017, best ways to capture high value for your MSP services. Before we get started, let's just do some quick housekeeping. During the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to share them using the questions or chat panel to the right of the GoToWebinar screen. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey. Please take a moment to tell us what you think as we continuously improve the content and quality of our online events. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to today's presenter. Take it away, Miguel.
Hey, thank you, Sara, and hi, everyone. On the questions piece, just so everyone knows, as Sara mentioned, ask your questions the way I actually try to do it a little different than everybody else does. I try to answer your questions or incorporate the answers into as I'm going along. I find that's more helpful. Sometimes people don't necessarily put complete questions, so I'm not sure what they're asking things about many times. But we'll start off a little bit about myself. I've been in technology for over 20 years now, so starting to age faster, it appears, or it feels like sometimes. I started an MSP back in Miami, so I've done what you're doing now, and I've been through the different what we call the life cycles of an MSP. I sold my company. I grew it. I sold it. I sold it to really one of the largest MSPs here in the United States, and I ran their local market. I ran systems. I've worked with acquisitions teams. My teams help with transition. So I've seen other products. I've felt the pain, and I've been around enough to build different solutions that we delivered at the time for MSPs. And then I came here to Kaseya back in around 2012, and I've actually worked with MSPs here globally. So I actually have a lot of miles that I've traveled the last couple of years that Erica can attest for. So on to the agenda. It's fairly simple. We're going to go over the methodology, going to go over the key findings, and then what I would say are next steps for you. What should you do with this type of information? Now, interesting thing about the survey is that we've been doing this for about 6 years already, and originally it started, and I think the name doesn't really give it justice anymore, but originally started as really getting an idea of what the pricing is. So a lot of people always ask, well, what are other MSPs pricing? What are they doing here? What are they doing there? And what it actually has become is, how are MSPs growing? How are they maturing? What are they doing that's a little different? We still involve pricing. There's still a lot of conversation about, what do you charge for this, what do you charge for that? But we're now able to extrapolate a lot more information in terms of just what they're pricing, but also what are they doing? And I think what you'll find from this, and what you've seen if you've been on these in the last 2 or 3 years, is that it's more now around direction than anything else. So, keep that in mind. Sample size is about 900 plus respondents. So it's a good chunk of groups from all over the world. And it's about double what we had last year. So there's a lot more interest in this survey. And actually, I'm starting to do more and more of these, specifically around the data in these surveys. So on to the key findings. So a couple of things here that you want to keep in mind. And we've been saying this for several years now, and it really hasn't changed all that much, where, the MSP market continues to grow, and it continues to grow fairly rapidly. What we try to do here is we try to say, we're going to put a line in the sand. We're going to say that, MSPs that grow larger than 10%, so 11% and up, we're going to just label those as high growth MSPs. You got to draw a line somewhere. Anything from 10% or down is we're going to call low growth. Doesn't mean that 6 to 10% is bad. It just means that you're just not growing as much as others. That's all. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Some key notes up here, 26% of respondents report that their average monthly recurring revenues grow past 3 years over 15%. And that's pretty impressive, and that they've been able to continue to do that year over year is pretty impressive. So the question I get a lot is, how are they doing that? Why are they able to do that? Maybe you're not, maybe you are, maybe you're not, and we're going to go into why that is. So it's just a little more than just providing you information, okay? So we'll start off with this. There's a lot going on this screen. So what we asked, one of the biggest questions we ask is, okay, what are the status of your revenues in the past 12 months versus the previous 12 months? Where have you grown? Where have you expanded? And what we have started to see here is that backup and recovery has been actually expanding at a higher growth than any other area. And a lot of you may ask, why that is, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but just keep that in mind. So for the most part, almost every area they've seen revenue expansion, all right, over the last 12 months compared to the previous 12 months, okay? And we'll dig into this a little bit more in a minute. So one of the things that we've seen is that due to this growth and where it's going, like I mentioned, we're seeing more of a divergence. So we started seeing this a little bit last year, where we're saying, well, it looks like the high growth MSPs are starting to pull away more so than it was in the past. And we're seeing more and more of that. But one of the reasons that we see around that is that they're offering more services, more options to their customers. And it doesn't mean that, don't think that means that they're offering, instead of offering, let's say, a lot of people like to say, like, a gold, silver, and platinum package, they may still have, 3 packages, but within those packages, they have a lot more than they were offering before, okay? And again, we'll get into a little bit more details around that, but just keep that in mind, that at the end of the day, high growth MSPs just offer more choice or more value for what the customer is receiving, okay? So one of the things that we started seeing is, type of NOC services offered, okay? So a lot of people look and say, oh, well, NOC, it's this big thing. NOC is expensive. NOC is a bunch of people. Actually, let me have you look at NOC a little differently. At the end of the day, for the most part, most MSPs handle alerts coming in from their systems, okay? For the most part, that's what a NOC does. You get alerts, you do something with them at some point in time. For the most part, all of us are doing some type of monitoring for our customers. So we got to manage alerts. So what we started to see, though, is that during business hours, you'll see that 44% of MSPs offer alert management or NOC services during business hours. And you start seeing that from a 24/7 perspective, around the clock perspective, high growth MSPs offer that significantly more so than low growth MSPs. And then what you're also seeing is that this little bit of outsourced is starting to happen, not just on the low growth side, but on the high growth side too. And that's an interesting thing. So just to kind of put that a little bit in perspective is, what we're starting to see is that from not only do you need to be offering a 24/7 NOC, but even if you are capable of offering it, meaning that you're able to have the infrastructure and the quantity of people to really do a true 24/7 NOC, or alert management offering, even those that can are outsourcing it, right? So that means that the smaller MSPs really have options here. They have options that they should be providing some type of NOC services, but they also have to look at providing those NOC services, so a lot of times being outsourced by someone else. And that's something that you should be looking at if you're not looking at it already. By the way, for those who've asked already a couple times, this presentation is being recorded. We do provide the recording, not necessarily the slides. So you will have that. It will be emailed to you at a later time. So on to the next piece. So in terms of backup and recovery services that are offered, it's a similar thing. So you start seeing, everyone offers, for the most part, a backup on site, meaning what we call here on site to on site. And you see it's pretty much the same. So most people offer what you would all consider a local backup. I have a server, I have something. Locally, I want to back it up to some local storage. It could be a NAS, it could be a USB drive, it could be whatever it is that's locally within that environment. Interesting enough, I would have thought the percentage would be more equal, but when it goes from on-site to cloud, you start seeing that high growth MSPs, definitely most of them offer that service as well. And then you start looking at the other ones. You start saying, well, cloud to cloud, and you say cloud to on-site. Some people start wondering, well, what does that really mean? Like, well, let's take cloud to cloud as an example. Cloud to cloud is when I have obviously some type of server in the cloud, but you're going to back it up to somewhere else in the cloud. So you may have a service or a server from your favorite cloud provider. It could be, Azure, it could be AWS, it could be someone else that's hosting your infrastructure, but you're going to actually back it up to another data center, another location, and not necessarily rely on their services only. And the reason for that is what we're seeing is that a lot of times the services of the cloud providers is not sufficient to fulfill the need that not just the MSP may have, but the MSP's customers may have. Okay, a lot of times providing a 30-day backup or 60-day backup or 1-year retention just isn't sufficient. And when you start getting into things like, Office 365 and other types of cloud providers, you need to find solutions that can offer a little more retention in a lot of cases, or a little more flexibility when it comes to backup. So cloud to cloud fulfills that. The other thing is cloud to on-site. So not just the idea of taking it from one cloud provider to some other cloud location, but also bringing that back on-site. And what we're seeing there is that the higher growth MSPs are offering those services more so than the low growth MSPs are. So with that same thing in mind, you start thinking about it, it's not just that they're offering those services, meaning they being the high growth MSPs are offering those services. It's also a matter that the high growth MSPs are offering all those services. It's not that they're offering it to it's not that they're just offering those specific services only more so than somebody else. It's actually that they're offering all of those services. And keep that in mind, okay? And they're not offering it to all their customers primarily. So maybe one customer has on-site only, one customer has off-site only. They have one customer that's consuming all those 4 different types of backups. And that's a really big thing for a lot of people to really understand. You have all these different types of backup services. You're going to offer it to the same customer in many cases. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, okay? So someone had asked about managed security services. So just sorry to answer your question before, we're getting into that right now. So in terms of security-oriented services that are offered, it's pretty much all the way down. If you look along this chart, down the line there, every single service, interestingly enough, except for antivirus, high growth MSPs are offering more of those services to their customers. Okay, so what is that for a lot of people? Well, the reality is that a single type of secure antivirus alone doesn't cut it. Okay, and just everyone on the phone has to really just understand that and grasp that. Everyone offers antivirus. They have to offer an antivirus. Antivirus is, for the most part, I'd say commoditized to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, it's not the only thing that you need to be offering nowadays. Another presentation we provide around security, you will see that, I think it's 63 or 68% of breaches are not a result of a virus or malware. Actually, it's a result of losing or having your password stolen. Antivirus doesn't take care of that for you. So things like 2 or multi-factor authentication are something that high growth MSPs are offering. Single sign-on, they're offering these services, allowing people to reset their own passwords, expansion on patch management being, more than just the operating system. They're offering anti-malware as a separate part away from the antivirus. And they also go into more detailed things like, what's network usage scanning, going on, what is actually going on in the network, or is there any unusual type of behavior that's going on in the network? So they're offering a lot of different types of services, but not necessarily any different than we were talking about, any different than we were talking about with backup. They're offering not just one of those services, they're offering all those services. So when they go to a customer and the customer is purchasing maybe their platinum package as an example, they're not just getting antivirus, they're getting antivirus to factor, single sign-on. They're getting patching. As we all know, at the end of the day, backup is part of that too. Any security offering has to include backup because, if and when the antivirus fails, you need a way to recover your data. But it's not just that they're offering one; they're offering all of these together. All right, so you start seeing that there's a lot of differentiation going on between what you would consider a high-growth MSP and a low-growth MSP. And it's not that, and what I don't want to confuse here, and I got this a lot last year, was like, well, does a high-growth MSP mean it's a large MSP? On the contrary, it doesn't. There's a high-growth MSP could be someone that's large or someone that's smaller. So how large you are as an MSP has nothing to do with it. It has to do more with the maturity that you are from an MSP in terms of what your service offerings are. So on to the next portion. When it comes to network and infrastructure and monitoring, it's a similar story. It's a similar story than what you saw in backup, that we saw in security. Again, we're going in and they're offering different types of services. For the most part, you will find that most people offer like things like up and down, meaning, is my server up, is my server down? Is my firewall up, is my firewall down? Or even, is my internet up or is my internet down? Okay, that's not the case for high growth MSPs. Yes, they do those types of things, all right, but they go beyond that. So they offer, on-site virtual device. They offer monitoring for on-site virtual devices. They offer things, around private cloud and public cloud and monitoring of cloud as a whole. And that's where you start seeing the real differentiation around, at least from a network and infrastructure monitoring perspective, is it. So a lot of the systems out there do handle some what I would call simple or basic monitoring. But the reality is that you now need to go beyond that. That alone just doesn't cut it anymore. All right. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a little while. So in terms of, similar to backup, in terms of all these services that they're offering, it goes back to same kind of concept. They're not just offering these a la carte. They're offering these same services or 8 services to the same customer. So you see here is that you start seeing that high growth MSPs are just offering more services, more options, more choices to their customer and their customer base. So I mentioned earlier, and I'll answer this one now so I don't keep talking about it. I mentioned earlier that the differentiation that we're using from between a high growth MSP and a low growth MSP is how they're growing. So high growth MSP is 11% up or higher growth year over 3-year average, and low growth is 10% and under. Okay, and like I mentioned at the beginning, doesn't mean that low growth is 10%, 5 to 10% is bad growth. Actually, it's not. It's really good, but it's just not as good as what some others are doing. All right, so one of the reasons, so what are those drivers? What is really driving a lot of what we're seeing, and why is it going in this direction? So let's talk about that just for a little bit. So we talked about all these different services, right? And we talked about the different types of plans and the different types of options that are being provided by the MSPs to their customer base. So one of the things that we're seeing here, and you look by this chart, is that the pricing that high growth MSPs are providing is also been higher. So it's not just that they're offering more services, and you may start saying, well, they're offering more services, they're charging more. There's a little more to it than that. And I think the next 3 or 4 slides will actually show that a little bit better. All right, so high growth MSPs, they're going around and they're going actually and they're hitting larger customers. Okay, so if you see here, what's the growth by customer size that represents them in terms of a user perspective, you will see what a high growth MSP is doing compared to a low growth. So look at 1 to 25. High growth MSPs tend to have larger customers than 25 users. So more than half of the respondents that were low growth MSPs ended up having 25 or less users. So what this is telling us is that high growth MSPs actually have larger customers too. And you may start seeing how this is starting to kind of come together and why, and kind of painting a picture here of what's going on. So just remember, they're charging more. They also have larger customers. So the next thing people ask us is like, okay, yeah, but so they're charging more, they have larger customers, but they're offering different services. Well, not really, not really. So one of the survey questions we have is that high growth MSPs are actually charging more for the same type of service in many cases. So we asked respondents, here's these two options. How much would you charge within these ranges? How many of you would charge within these ranges for these two options? So are you going to offer a private cloud service, per environment per month? Or, if you also offer cloud monitoring services and assume like 25 devices and about 2,500 metrics that you're monitoring on a monthly basis, what are you charging for anything like that? So you start seeing things like where high growth MSP is charging over $600 for what is the same service. They're just able to charge that much more than a lot of other MSPs. And when you look at the bottom portion, when you say, over 19% charge over $1,500 for the same service, where 43% of low growth MSPs charge $500 or less for cloud monitoring services. So a lot of you may say, okay, why is that? I'm getting there. All right, before I get there, one of the things I want to talk about is the top concerns, and this I think was referenced again in that first question we got earlier. What are the top concerns that everyone's seeing? Well, security is the top concern that everyone's seeing. So 30% of I guess out of 100 here is all around security. But if you start adding up the next three here, so you start looking at cloud adoption, you look at migration, private cloud, things like that, you start seeing that those cloud alone makes up another 30%. So the two largest things that are a problem or a need that customers will have based on what MSPs are telling us is really security and cloud, okay? All right, and then the truth is that it doesn't matter where you live. Globally, this appears to be the case. The only interesting thing here that was interesting is that Asia Pac has a higher increase in the value of IT as a competitive advantage. And the reality is that there we're starting to see more MSPs. Believe it or not, if you're in the US, there are still a lot of MSPs in other countries that are still doing break fix, or they're not actually MSPs at this point, but a lot of companies are still doing break fix that are trying to move into being an MSP. But for the most part, what we're seeing globally is concerns around security and around cloud. All right, so quick summary, and I want to kind of bring this all together a little bit for everyone here. So we talked about the MSP market continues to be on a hot streak. There is a divergence in progress between high growth MSPs and low growth MSPs, and a lot of that is around choice. And then things that are a little important here is that high growth MSPs are charging more for what appear to be similar services, okay? And security and cloud still be a top concern. So they say, okay, so great, why does this matter? So it matters because what we're seeing is that the high growth MSP, the reason that this divergence appears to be happening is because they're able to go after larger customers. Larger customers are requiring these types of things. So if you want to have larger customers nowadays, they're requiring you to have a 24/7 NOC. And it doesn't mean that you have to build it. You could outsource it, but you got to have that service. If you want larger customers, you got to have what I'm calling here hybrid backup options, meaning that you got to offer more than just on-site and off-site backup. You got to go beyond that. Doesn't mean you have to make a huge investment in something. It just means that you have to have, the systems and the products to be able to offer those types of services. Okay. Same thing with security options. It's got to be more than just AV. It's got to be AV. It's got to be multi-factor. It's got to be single sign-on. It's got to be network inspection. Those are the things you got to be doing, and you got to expand your monitoring options. Offering up-down alone, like I said, that simple monitoring just doesn't cut it. Monitoring services alone and up-down just don't do it anymore. You've got to offer more than that, because these larger customers, when something is running slow, and them calling you saying, "Hey, my system is running slow," and you spending hours trying to figure it out, what may be actually going on, isn't the answer. They're not going to they're not going to sit down and wait for you to do that. You have to have systems that'll tell you, okay, based on the monitoring we're doing, yeah, we see that, that there's a system here that's maybe running a little non-optimally, and we got to go look at that. And that's probably the issue as to why you're running slow. You got to have some answers for people. So what this means is that the high growth MSPs are actually leaving, or like I mentioned before, diverging away from the low growth MSPs because they're able to go after these larger customers. These larger customers, there's not a lot of competition at that point. So they're not as price sensitive. Going beyond the 25, 50, 100 user endpoints, going into that 100 to 500 user endpoints, there's not a lot of competition. And, comparing whether, you offer these 8 services that are very similar to these other 8 services from your competitor, and the pricing is a little bit less, and that it's not about pricing anymore. It's all about the value that you're bringing to your customer. And you have to look at it that way, because we all want to grow our businesses. We all want to take our businesses to the next level. And what we're seeing from all of these is that in order to do that, you've got to get on board this concept of saying, okay, I have to offer more services. I just can't be offering the same services that everyone else is doing. And what we're starting to see, or in the past from these low growth MSPs, is that when we all started our businesses, we all had these entrepreneurial, we were willing to take risks, let's put it that way. And now for some reason, what's going on is that a lot of MSPs are not willing to take any more risk, or they look at it as, they're getting comfortable in where they're at, and they're saying, well, I want to see what's going on. I don't have any customers yet that are willing to purchase this for whatever reason. Well, yeah, but until you have that service, you're not going to have any customers to sell it to either. You can't wait for your customer to ask you of it. You have to build your services out so that you can go and find new customers. You have to build your services out so that you can go to your current customers and say, hey, customer, in healthcare and retail, you need to have multi-factor authentication. It's a requirement. You can't get away without it. You have to have more than, a month's worth of backups. You have to have better retention. We have to take these backups somewhere else. You need to move to more cloud services. You have to tell them you have to tell them to get there, but you have to have those services in place to do that. So you got to think about that. You have to invest in your company, and you have to invest in your company and look at it as saying, I'm going to offer these services so I can compete in the future. Because your competition in the future isn't going to be scrounging for, whether I'm $25 to $50 less than the MSP next door. It's got to be how you're going to differentiate yourself from them. And these are the ways that we've been starting to see over the last 3 years. These are the things that their customers are demanding. Okay. So we went through a lot of information, went maybe a little faster because we didn't have that many questions. Let me see what questions we have here that I can go through that I haven't seen yet for whatever reason. So someone asked, can high growth MSPs offer, charge more because they're offering larger customers? They can. Like I said, that's exactly what it is. They can charge more. We've seen, if you look at the actual survey on our website, you'll see that their hourly rate is higher. What they charge for their bundles are higher. Everything that they do in terms of the customer they're going after is just a lot more. Some of them charge per user, and we see a lot of high growth MSPs that are charging up, $160, $165 plus per user for supporting, at a user base level. So, you'll keep that in mind. So, I want to thank everybody for coming. If there's any more questions, please go ahead and put them in. And you can download the full report, from our website if you like. And there's a lot more information in that report. If you do have any more questions or anything else that you'd like us to, any more information, feel free to email me at miguel.lopez@kaseya.com. And thank you all very much for joining.